They weren't killed on an open battlefield. They were buried under concrete, steel, and fire. A port that was supposed to be safe turned into a grave. Missiles flew more than 500 kilometers with precision, and whatever protection was promised there simply didn't exist. What happened in Odesa wasn't just an attack. It was a message, and it was aimed straight at NATO's core. What stands out to me first is the setting. This didn't happen deep in contested trenches or along an active front line. It happened at a port, under the assumption that the Black Sea coast was still a relatively protected logistical space. According to multiple military-linked accounts, hangars were obliterated, armored vehicles reduced to scrap, and a foreign convoy erased in minutes. The claim circulating among Russian and pro-Russian sources is that Romanian troops were killed in the strike, operating under NATO's logistical umbrella. If that is accurate, the political weight of this episode goes far beyond a routine exchange of fire. But to understand why Odesa was hit with this intensity, you have to step back. This sequence didn't start at the port. It started days earlier, hundreds of kilometers away, when Ukrainian forces launched a large-scale drone attack across 5 Russian regions. The targets, according to Moscow, included civilian infrastructure and even a thermal power facility in the Rostov region. Nearly 100 drones were reportedly intercepted. From Russia's perspective, this wasn't symbolic harassment. It was an attempt to punish the rear, to stretch defenses, and to show that Russian territory itself was vulnerable. And this is where the logic of retaliation begins to harden. When that drone wave hit, the response wasn't rhetorical. It wasn't diplomatic signaling. Russian Defense Minister Andrei Borisov authorized a chain of high-precision strikes across Ukrainian-controlled territory. The focus wasn't random cities. It was energy infrastructure and logistical nodes that feed not just Ukrainian forces, but NATO's operational presence behind the scenes. In Odesa Oblast, the strike took on a different character. At least one Iskander missile reportedly hit the area of Sharat, striking a fuel depot near a railway station along with several warehouses. Residents described massive fires and a secondary explosion that lasted for hours. That detail matters. Secondary detonations usually mean stored fuel, ammunition, or sensitive military material. This wasn't an empty civilian facility caught by accident. It was a loaded site. The aftermath added another layer. The area was flooded with ambulances carrying special military and security plates, the kind reserved for armed forces, intelligence services, and senior officials. That tells you something important. This wasn't just a logistics stop. It was a hybrid node where fuel, munitions, and command elements intersected, placed dangerously close to the maritime front. From Mykolaiv, underground resistance coordinator Sergei Lebedev pointed attention toward the port of Izmail. According to him, military cargo was actively being unloaded there, and the entire regional energy system was being prioritized to keep that port operational and connected to Romania. In other words, Ukraine's strained electrical grid was being bent to sustain a NATO-linked artery. Russian media reports go further, claiming that multiple strikes on Odesa's ports destroyed warehouses along with foreign military personnel, including Romanians involved in unloading weapons. This is the moment where the narrative shifts. If Romanian troops were indeed present and killed, the missiles didn't just hit Ukraine. They drew blood from the Atlantic Alliance itself. Romania isn't a peripheral actor. It has been a NATO member since 2004 and plays a central role on the alliance's eastern flank, especially in Black Sea logistics. Its bases, corridors, and ports are designed to support exactly this kind of regional projection. Seeing Romanian forces operating in Odesa underscores how thin the line has become between assistance and direct co-belligerence. There's also an economic dimension that often gets lost. Odesa is the economic heart of southern Ukraine. It's the country's largest deepwater port, historically channeling huge volumes of foreign trade, including grain and vegetable oil bound for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. After Russia's blockade early in the war, only a handful of ports on the northwestern Black Sea coast remained functional: Odesa, Chornomorsk, and Pivdeniye. These terminals are lifelines for exports, but they also double as potential weapons corridors. That dual-use reality is precisely why control over those docks carries enormous strategic weight. This is where the Iskander system becomes decisive. It's a short-range, mobile, tactical ballistic missile with a range of roughly 500 kilometers. Its quasi-ballistic trajectory and terminal maneuvering make interception extremely difficult. Each missile can carry nearly half a ton of explosives. It travels at hypersonic speed, leaving air defenses with seconds, not minutes, to react. When an Iskander hits a port packed with fuel and ammunition, survival becomes a matter of timing and luck. From Moscow's point of view, this wasn't indiscriminate violence. It was a calibrated response to what it describes as the militarization of civilian ports, shielded by foreign flags and NATO proximity. The message is blunt. If you use civilian infrastructure as cover for alliance logistics, those sites will be treated as legitimate targets. At the same time, another front was opening across Ukraine, the energy war. After the February 3rd strikes, cities like Kyiv, Odesa, Dnipro, and Kharkiv were left without electricity or heating, with temperatures hovering near -20 degrees Celsius. Cold and blackout together are not just uncomfortable. They're strategically crippling. Pro-Russian sources argue that Kyiv itself provided the justification, pointing to earlier strikes on Belgorod using US-supplied HIMARS missiles. Ukrainian journalists celebrated those attacks as victories. Shortly after, they were forced to report on severe retaliatory strikes against their own capital. Analysts described this as a methodical campaign. First, substation nodes and distribution hubs are destroyed. Then cities are isolated from nuclear generation still under Kyiv's control. Plants like Khmelnytsky, Yuzhno-Ukrainsk, Rivne, and Zaporizhia aren't targeted for their reactors, but for the transmission lines feeding Ukraine's military-industrial complex. Key substations such as Dniprovska or facilities in Kirovohrad Oblast are mentioned as potential breaking points. Sever those links, and large parts of central Ukraine go dark. Here's the uncomfortable part. Nuclear power can't just sit idle indefinitely without stable demand and grid output. If the flow collapses, operators are eventually forced to shut reactors down. Experts warn that this could spell the end of Ukraine's independent power generation. And without power, factories stall, rail transport becomes unreliable, and ports lose functionality. Western weapons, no matter how advanced, turn into immobile metal without the infrastructure to support them. What's clear is that while Kyiv's leadership remains largely silent, some Telegram channels are already warning that Ukrainians could be facing rolling blackouts for 3 to 5 years. The claim is that Zelensky lost the infrastructure war he himself escalated. That's a harsh assessment, but when you look at the damage map, it's not irrational. This brings us back to Odesa and to those reportedly buried under the docks. In the broader picture, their deaths aren't just a battlefield tragedy. They function as a warning. If NATO continues to treat the Black Sea and Ukrainian ports as safe military corridors, Russia is signaling that those assumptions no longer hold. Let me pause here and ask something that doesn't have an easy answer. At what point does logistical support quietly become direct participation, and who decides where that line actually is? I'm genuinely interested in how you see that boundary shifting, and it's worth reading your thoughts in the comments. From Moscow's narrative, this campaign is framed as symmetrical but more effective retaliation for strikes on Rostov and Belgorod. Russian officials argue they didn't open the door to targeting energy infrastructure. They claim Kyiv did, with Western guidance and weapons. In Western media, the story is framed as indiscriminate attacks and energy terror. Moscow counters that there is nothing more dangerous than using precision systems and long-range drones to hit Russian cities, then demanding immunity for the hubs coordinating those strikes. Before wrapping this up, there's another question worth sitting with. If alliance air defenses can't guarantee safety against systems like Iskander in these environments, what does that mean for future deployments along NATO's eastern flank? That's not rhetorical. It cuts to the core of deterrence credibility, and again, I'd like to see how you think about it. In the end, the episode in Odesa closes as a clear setback for NATO. A member state, Romania, potentially taking casualties on foreign soil. A logistical corridor shattered. And a stark reminder that even layered air defense doesn't equal invulnerability against hypersonic, precision systems. Historically, wars shift when assumptions collapse. What was assumed safe yesterday becomes contested today. That's the reality taking shape here. And it's one that should make everyone involved deeply uncomfortable. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we're tracking the evolution of this story day by day. Make sure to activate notifications and don't miss our next report. And remember, you can now become a channel member. If you believe in this project and want to see it grow, your support makes all the difference. If you'd like to support our channel financially, which we greatly appreciate, you can do so through Patreon and PayPal. The link is in the video description.